All right, it's a wonderful good evening here in this part of the world, precisely Jos Plateau State, Nigeria. And if you're in Auckland, it's about 4 a.m. Friday morning. It's 10 a.m. in Boston, Thursday, and it's about 5 o'clock in the evening in Cape Town. Somewhere in Indonesia, it's 10 p.m. and in Nairobi, it's 6 p.m. This is welcoming you to the IARJ dialogue on religion and the pandemic. We've had this very interesting conversation previously in Asia, North America, Europe, Latin America, and the Mediterranean. And this dialogue is being live streamed on the IRJ Facebook. I'll take that again. It's being live streamed on the IARJ Facebook, and the recording will be available both on Facebook and on our website, www.dairj, that's our website.org. With me, I've got wonderful, wonderful practicing journalists across the continent of Africa. I've got in the city of Jos, Nigeria, Odinga Adiwu. She's a producer with PRTV Nigeria, North Central city of Jos, state precisely, Plateau State. And of course, in Cape Town, South Africa, I've got Yazeed, independent journalist and photographer, and he does what he does best. Yes, in the city of Nairobi, Kenya, reporting as a diversity editor is Verah Okeyo. She writes for the Daily Nation. They're wonderful journalists and practicing media persons who would share the perspectives on the pandemic and religion. And so, without being gender insensitive, Yazeed, I will start with you. Kindly tell us about the major contributions that religious institutions and faith communities make for the common good of society, especially during the pandemic. Could you give us an experience, what's been like in South Africa?
Hi, and greetings from Cape Town. And as you mentioned, this is here in, it's just after 5 p.m. in Cape Town. And one thing that we have always had in Cape Town has been a very active religious community. So whether it's COVID or whether it's some of the other social issues that we are used to experiencing in South Africa, the religious community has always been very active in responding to that. I mean, it goes back as far as the struggle days. So during COVID, we saw religious communities essentially doing the good work of feeding people, making sure that faith-based, rather that people, irrespective of their faith, had food, and also that people were, kept spiritually, if I can say, not active, but spiritually inspired maybe. So because faith gatherings or religious gatherings were prohibited during lockdown, so people couldn't go to mosques and churches and synagogues and other places of worship. And what happened was that technology was, of course, used to also deliver sermons and communicate with people. So yeah, I mean, I think overall the faith-based communities in South Africa have a long history of responding to the needs of people, whether it's via encouraging people with spirituality or with feeding people or making sure that people have some of the other needs met.
Thank you so very much, Yazeed. Verah, what's the experience like in the big city of Nairobi?
Just like Yazeed has said, Kenyans are religious. Over 90% of us are subscribed to some religious affiliation, whether Christian or Muslim or the African traditional heritages. So apart from the feeding and the social needs of the people, particularly the church, the Christian church, was very active in being a place where people can be taught about the virus, how does it affect people. And of course they stopped attending church because of the lockdown measures and the social distancing. But even so, I interacted with pastors and shepherds, the magistery, in whatever capacity they were in. They did not stop making their calls, visiting their church members, and also realizing that people that just don't go to church because they want to know about God. The church is to some people, as much as we may disagree with it, it's a psychiatric place where they go and, share their frustrations with church. So the church was particularly careful now that we are now physically distant, that they were able to make sure that those members of the church, particularly the old and people suffering from, non-communicable diseases like cancers, who rely on the church to be a source of inspiration, that they did not lose that touch with
Wow,
their
thank you.
members. Yeah.
Thank you so very much, Verah. I smiled when you said Kenyans are very religious people, and I'm sure Odinga would have a say on that. If Kenyans are 90% religious, Nigerians are 101% very religious people. Everyone's got a church in his house or has got a mosque in the house, and some other traditional religious practices. So, Odinga, what's been the experience in Nigeria?
Okay, Charles, thank you so very much. Yazeed, Verah, thank you so very much for your contributions. The stories is not different from what Yazeed has said or Verah. And like Charles said, if Cape Town or where Yazeed is speaking from is religious, and Verah too is claiming religiosity from her own end, Nigeria tops the list. And religious leaders started sending awareness messages. But first of all, I think the pandemic took the globe unawares. And even in the climes where we thought that they were more prepared, also we're grappling with the challenges of the pandemic. And then we come back to Africa. We had religious leaders who were willing and were going out to educate their members and the rest of them. And then we woke up one day still trying to grapple with the fact that we have an unseen enemy that we're living with. And we had one of the religious leaders on a Friday prayer day who went to tell his congregation that the pandemic was rather a government way of trying to stop them from worshiping or stop them from doing other religious activities that they are used to. So I don't know how to say this in English, but I'd like to say it in Hausa, because that was what they were chanting on that fateful Friday. And they were chanting, Malam ya ce ba corona, mu ma mun ce ba corona, meaning the clergy says there's no corona, so the followership too were saying there's no corona. It took the security agencies in the state to actually bring him to order and make him understand the seriousness of what we're facing. But by and large, eventually, I guess he accepted the facts. But with the instructions and the COVID-19 instructions of wearing masks and washing hands and sanitizing ourselves and all that, you still see those category of people or group of people still going about their businesses without care in the world. No masks,
Wow.
no sanitizers. And
Wow.
you wonder, when are we going to get out of it with this kind of attitude?
I think wonderful outline there, Odinga, but it's not peculiar to Nigeria. I know that, for example, in Kampala, Ghana, and precisely in parts of Sudan, institutions, especially religious institutions, had difficulties adapting to COVID-19 protocols. Specifically, I recall a church somewhere in town in Kampala where they held deliverance services and claimed that they could cure COVID-19. And in the peak of the pandemic, the church was full with people who claimed to be COVID positive. Of course, that wasn't also peculiar in Kampala. I know also somewhere in Ghana where a particular pastor would sell what he claimed to be spiritual cleansing water for COVID patients. The religious institutions across Africa had various approaches to it. And I'm sure government also had a tough time in this part of the continent containing this pandemic and religious institutions, which takes me to my next question. And Verah, I did like to start with you. Can you talk about the tensions between government and the religious institutions, or between different religions? Like in some countries, it was between Christians and Muslims. What was it like in Kenya, which was as a result of the restrictions imposed because of the pandemic? Was there any tension between government, between religious organizations, faiths? What was it like in Nairobi?
Of course, there was tensions. First of all, I would like to, and there have many studies, I know I'll get stoned for this, but there have been many studies talking about how particularly the Pentecostals, how it's very, very closely linked to capitalism. Like the church has some sort of eliteness to it, and what it wants to take from people. Like, giving of tithes, and because there are people who are, Kenya has very flashy pastors, like people who drive the V8, and so this was threatened. This was threatened during this time because people are not coming to church, and they're not going to be giving the offerings. So at the beginning, it felt like the religious leaders were feeling like, you guys, you want to. Of course, they would code it in some religious term, but you could see it was all about, there was no money flowing at that time. There was no sort of sense of belonging to the church that way. So that really brought up a lot of tension between the government imposing the lockdown, and then they would say like, oh, it's the devil, is working through this person, so that's why. And then that tension was resolved very quickly when some elderly magistery members of the church in the leadership started dying. Some of them died, and they were like, oh Lord, this thing is here. So now that's when they decided to, let's backpedal. And then the government also does not want to annoy the religious group so much, because they have a very big sway on the population. So the government was also we are approaching the election period. So those people who are hoping to be voted again, they're like, let's come together. Yeah, so that resolved it a bit faster.
Thank you. I'm all smiles. I'm all smiles because I'm about to take on Yazeed. Yazeed, I know that in South Africa, because of COVID, you had to stop drinking. No more vodka, no more alcohol. I know that. I know that happened. So, what happened? Was there also a situation where we had tithe and offering affected by COVID? What was the tension in Cape Town?
So in South Africa, the government decided to prohibit the sale of cigarettes and alcohol, which meant that people who like to consume alcohol and cigarettes were kind of, they felt quite frustrated about that. A lot of people didn't see the sense in it. Of course, the government told people that, there was it spreads the virus. And also with alcohol, the reasoning was that people's behavior would be impacted and they would be a bit more reckless. And unfortunately in South Africa, we do have a situation where alcohol and violence, there's a link between the two. And when the government started selling alcohol, or rather let me say when the government prohibited alcohol, there were actually fewer incidents of violent crime reported, and the hospitals, for example, weren't that busy with violent crime or crime linked directly to alcohol abuse. And when it was unbanned again, when people could buy alcohol again, I mean, we actually saw statistics from the police and hospital facilities that alcohol-related crime went up again. It also gave rise to a second economy that I guess was there already. I mean, we know that there are various economies in our country where people can get their hands on just about anything. So cigarettes were being sold still, and alcohol was also still being, there were ways of getting alcohol and cigarettes. The prices, of course, were a lot higher. So people were buying not so good cigarettes for very, very high prices. I also have heard of people who actually were able to quit smoking during the COVID-19 lockdown because they couldn't access cigarettes. So, you know, it's a complex situation because it comments so much about who we are as South Africans as well. And COVID-19 definitely showed us a lot about, I guess, our society.
Yeah, that's true. Odinga, what was the experience like in Nigeria?
Well, like we keep saying, it's not different from other African countries, but there could be a little difference that we could share together. In Nigeria, especially in Plateau State where I reside, now government had to, I remember when the first case came into Plateau or was discovered on the Plateau, as religious as we all were, we kept praying, back to sender. It will never exceed this one case and that and that. But eventually, apart from Lagos and one other state, Plateau is topping the lists on the new cases being discovered on a daily basis. But while the pandemic was ongoing and we were still praying and also looking at the numbers in other states, the lockdown came. When the lockdown came, it made life very, very difficult for a lot of people. As simple as water was difficult to access. So a few people were volunteering, especially the Water Board of Plateau State, volunteered to take water in tankers to those difficult areas where they couldn't access water. And then for me, I also had a neighbor who had a friend in high places. Once in 2 weeks, she could talk to the person and the person will bring a tanker for about 24 families. We live in one big community and we'll all get water for like 2 weeks before the next lockdown comes again. But
Right.
the issue of drinking alcohol or smoking was technically knocked down without anybody telling anyone because all those places were closed. You dare not open your shop without a permission, except if you're living in a community where it's enclosed and you have a shop inside, then you can sell for people items as they come to request for them. Except for that,
Right.
those public places where they drink or buy cigarettes and all that were closed.
All right. All right, thank you so very much, Odinga. And permit me to draw from your phrase, people in high places. In Africa, we don't always have the privilege of being in high places. And that takes me to my next question. And I possibly will start with Yazeed. And this talks about COVID-19 vaccines, prescriptions, solutions. I remember the Madagascar herbal treatment that came to Nigeria, and we were told after a couple of months that it didn't work out. In some African cities, people resorted to unconventional methods of treating. Across religious bodies, there were pray it out, it's the work of the devil. What was the experience like in South Africa? What was the prescription to fight the pandemic, especially from the religious perspectives? Any examples that comes readily to the mind?
Well, You know, interestingly, most of the religious or faith-based communities in South Africa were very cooperative with the government around COVID-19 lockdown regulations. Um, there were some incidents where some people did want to still gather and pray, and we did see that happening in small numbers. There were incidents here and there, but to a large extent, the faith-based communities in South Africa adhered to the lockdown regulations, and there weren't that many sort of, if I can say, stories coming out of local remedies for COVID-19. There was a lot of conspiracy theories, definitely. I mean, one of the biggest conspiracy theories, or one of the biggest theories rather that people did share a lot was the idea of like 5G towers going up and the link between COVID and 5G. But that was something that was going on globally. It wasn't just something that we saw here in South Africa. I didn't really come across sort of like people selling remedies for COVID-19. There wasn't any special kind of soap or water or cleansing, anything being sold on the market. To a large extent, if anything, there were some people who definitely just thought that this was a bit of a hoax, and they actually also felt that this was just another way for people to steal and make money. And unfortunately, we did see that. I mean, we have seen a lot of government officials stealing, or we have seen a fair number of government officials stealing from the coffers of the COVID-19 funds. And there are so many cases now going on, whether it's with money that was meant to be to help people who lost their jobs, or whether it was personal protective equipment, tenders. There's been all kinds of ways, because, you know, there's a lot of...
I can imagine. I can imagine. I think that's a common thread for most African governments. And I think it's also a global thing, because no one was prepared for this. Verah, I'll come to you again. And you know, you were talking about until some of the church elders in Nairobi started dying. I mean, I found that quite interesting. So it was like a wake-up call. So
Yes.
while you try to address in terms of prescription, I also like to ask you very quickly as we round up, what has been your experience as a journalist? I mean, what has it been like reporting on COVID-19 across religious and faith diversity groups?
Wow, the experience, I cannot summarize it in one word, but basically I could just say that religiosity in Kenya plays out in some negative, in some very positive way, as has always been for religion and public health. So this was a public health issue. So you are always going to find those people who were a very big source of misinformation, because they were really targeted. The same way they always do with vaccines. They tell people, don't take your children for vaccination. That was the same way we had at the very beginning of don't wear masks. And then to imagine that if you're Pentecostal, evangelical, and I don't know, the 20th century Christian, even Catholics, the fact that they were reading, singing, the act of clapping your hands exposes your risks, hugging, it makes your risks very high. So that just emboldened the stigma. And we have seen this, it's not just on COVID-19, it was also there for HIV, like how to try and run away from this public health issue. They'll say, oh, this has come as punishment because you're gay, you're homosexual. So there was a little bit of that. But the good thing about COVID-19 was that it was airborne. It was aerosolized. So the impact was instant. Like, you get it, you're in the hospital, tomorrow you're dead. So that kind of like made people run away from this, this haze that people stay in, that no matter how much you fast, you got to put on the mask. You have to keep yourself the distance and all that. So I have been, as a reporter, have been seeing both the good and the bad, and how if you're ever going to go into the public health space, you need to appreciate that kind of reception. A very small number of people in the church will always, not small actually, a very big number will always have a collision with science, a collision with public health. And that is something,
That's correct.
yeah, just saying this is good, this is bad will not work. You have to know how that works. So for us, this is very mean to say. The fact that some of the religious leaders died, you were like, my friend, if he went and you know how devoted he was, I mean, you can go too. So try and wear your mask and try and just keep your distance. So that has been my experience.
All right. Odinga, I hear that, especially in Nigeria, and that was the case in, I had something similar happen in Addis of all places, that's in Ethiopia, where the conversation was centered around COVID-19, journalists, reporters, media practitioners, and safety. Sometimes, and it's always been the case that journalists forget their own safety in the course of their duty. What's the situation been like? What's the conversation been like in Nigeria in terms of journalists, COVID-19, their safety? How has it been?
Okay, it's been a very unfortunate situation because most of the times the journalists go out there to report some of these situations or events, and ironically forget to take care of themselves. But we've seen a few journalists who have been infected, but have also been able to pull through and have come back to tell their stories, which is very encouraging. And then we've also seen chief executives of media houses who have mingled with those at the top and also come down with the virus. And they've also pulled through and all that. But you kind of think that with such experiences, some of these chief executives will come back and say, okay, this thing is serious. Let's do it this way so that we will stop other infections from coming in and all of that. But you don't see it, especially with government-owned media houses. You don't see those kind of things. While we were at the peak of the pandemic, you can't access my office without being tested whether your temperature is high or low, and then you can walk in without a mask or have a sanitizer with you, even sanitize yourself by the gate before you enter. But now it's like life is normal. Nobody cares anymore. And the infections, the numbers are growing.
Wow, I can imagine, and that takes me to Yazeed. And Yazeed, I'm about to take you on an interesting conversation, and let's see if we can steal 2 minutes for this. Yazeed, you are a photographer, and pictures tell stories, and I mean, a lot of people, I know journalists who've never seen a ventilator or who don't even know how the tests are carried out. In terms of photos, what kind of sights did you see COVID-19?
Mm-hmm. So visually, we had access to the temporary hospitals that had been set up in our city here in Cape Town. So I went to this massive sort of like warehouse space where there were just hundreds of beds being laid out for patients or potential patients, people who were going to, according to the numbers, people who were going to be infected with COVID and would not be able to recover when they are at home, because obviously when you tested positive, you need to be isolated. So there were these hospitals that were being set up. I had also gone to hospitals that had high numbers of infections of staff. I did not go into the hospitals, but I was outside and I interviewed, for example, somebody from one of the unions who talked about the situation inside the hospital. A big part of the story and a big part of our job was making the story or accessing the story for the benefit of our public, because a lot of governments have been very emboldened around the world because of COVID, making very unilateral decisions on behalf of citizens without any input from citizens, whether it comes to budgets, whether it comes to lockdown, whether it comes to just a whole range of things, right? So for me as a journalist, I met with politicians. Of course, I went around with the National Health Minister when he went to these temporary makeshift hospitals. I met with on numerous occasions with the Premier here of the Western Cape, the Western Cape government, which is the province or the state where I am in. They had received ventilators from a foreign government. So we went there, they showed us how the machines work. The visuals were also about the emptiness of our city. And that really got to me. I even started a project on Instagram. It was called #MissingYouCapeTown, because the streets were so empty, and I would take pictures with a sign that says "Missing You" in different parts of our city. And it was a way of keeping people connected through the visuals with the city. All these empty places, really feeling that our city was just not the same, you know? So, I mean, there was a lot. I mean, I do a weekly radio show. I did TV journalism, and I also did writing and photography for print newspaper.
All right. Verah, do I have you there? Yeah. Verah, I like when you said something about the 21st century Christians. That's like the social media Christians, like you said. And for those of you who work as day-to-day reporters, the internet, social media was a very important component. Disinformation, misinformation, fake news. How did you cope with it as a journalist? How was it like in Nairobi? How was the rumor mongering spread across WhatsApp platforms? And like Yazeed raised the issue of 5G. How did you cope?
Oh, wow. That has always been there. And Kenyans, if KOT, they are called Kenyans on Twitter. They are very vicious. I don't want to say vicious. They are very active. Like they can bring diplomatic issues because of just tweeting. So this situation is where that also came alive, you know. But in this case, I was really, what can I say? Pleased that Kenyans came together for their own people, because our government, we have had massive corruption. All the money that was brought for us to respond to the COVID-19, people ate, even they sold even the free masks that came from Jackma. I'm telling you, Kenyans. So social media and that was to defend, but the disinformation and the misinformation was at the very beginning, where people were like, you cannot get this thing if you're young. And I suppose that vacuum was there because even the scientists themselves, who are, as opinion polls would show, are very respected. They are very respected members of the community in my country. But because they also did not have the answers, so it was easy for that vacuum to come in there. And then, of course, the church with the Lord is in control. Nothing will happen if you died properly. Hey, you're young, and quoting few verses that you shall take it by violence. There's a verse like that. They'll take the kingdom by violence. So those were some of the things that came there. So how I encountered it, as I finish up in 1 minute, is it's always good for a reporter to really know your beat. Like I read books about my beat, that is journalism and science, which has all those other elements, religion, culture, and gender. So when you read and educate yourself about and I specialized. I came to the newsroom as a crime reporter, and I did that for only 2 weeks. For the last 9 years, I've been a health reporter. So I really know where to go for information and how. I've seen the patterns of how these things happen. I was there with SARS, I was there with MERS-CoV, which is a coronavirus, and I saw how religion played out. So I made sure that I did not repeat the same mistakes that happened that time here, which are always compounded by a church that is so digitally connected. So what I'll say, for this information, reporters have to know their beat. And by knowing about things, spending your time in it, reading about it and teaching yourself, and always being an open mind. Just don't go and say, I'm not the kind of reporter. Even if I feel it, I will not say, look at these fools. And sometimes you see that come into the story. No.
Wow.
You have to understand that and report that way.
Thank you, Verah. And Odinga, I will put you on the spot as we round up. Verah had talked about Jack Ma. Interesting how the Chinese man was a recurring decimal in the whole of Africa. So, talking about Jack Ma, Africa, Nigeria particularly, I will put this question to you. What was it like in terms of accountability? For those of us in the media development sector, it's always been accountability, accountability. Yazeed touched about public officials putting their hands on public till. What has it been in terms of accountability? Public officials being accountable to the people in terms of what they were supposed to do, health officials. What was the experience like in Nigeria as you wrap up?
Okay, I would like to draw the attention to Plateau State where I reside, and maybe extend to other states that the situation was the same. At the onset of the pandemic, there were sensitization going on by government, and the Plateau State governor follows suit from the Presidential Committee on COVID-19 by daily reporting and updating the citizens on what it is all about and how we're supposed to go about our daily lives and all that. And then in between, because life became so difficult and all of that, there was a provision by both the federal government and the state government on providing for the citizens palliatives to cushion the hard times that citizens were facing. And then the markets too were not helping because, for example, before the pandemic, we could get to the market and you get like 4 sizable lemon 50. And then suddenly with the pandemic, those same number of lemons, you couldn't even get them for 300. They were 500. And then there were certain items in the market that you couldn't afford them, like ginger, like a whole lot of other citrus fruits, because it was said that if you take that, it helps with the pandemic and all its best, and also provided isolation centers where people who were infected were taken there for treatment. Even though I never got to close to any of the isolation centers to see how good or bad it was, but there were stories coming out that some of those isolation centers were like, I don't know, there were no isolation centers, and people were being left to themselves. They were not attended to. That means the patients were being left to themselves. They were not attended to, and as we're seeing different in it.
All right. Thank you. It's been wonderful. This is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna give every one of my wonderful panelists, you've done a yeoman's job, including the 2 wonderful ladies. So this is me being the classical headmaster timekeeper. So I'm gonna give everybody 30 seconds on the count of go. Yazeed, your final thoughts, 30 seconds.
Yazeed, you're mute.
Oh, Yazeed, it looks like you're mute.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now
Yes.
we can hear
Okay,
you.
cool. I mean, I've got this technology, right? Anyway, so we are at the stage in South Africa now where everybody's looking at what's going to happen next. There are concerns that there might be a second wave and another lockdown. So we've kind of done well generally in South Africa. We've had about 15,000 deaths and of course a lot of infections, which is much lower than a lot of other countries in terms of the deaths. But we know that we're not out of COVID-19 yet. So we're still looking, and we are going to wait and see what will happen next.
Thank you, Yazeed. Verah, your closing thoughts.
Oh, my closing thought back to the subject that we are having today. I would like newsrooms to invest, particularly in Africa, where religion is a really, really, really big influence, that we should invest in reporters that have some in-depth knowledge in that subject, because how we report about these things can break or build a nation in terms of a public health crisis such as the one we are dealing with.
Thank you so very much. Odinga, over to you. Your closing thoughts.
Thank you very much. My closing thoughts, I'd like to say that the pandemic is here and we don't know how long it's going to last or how soon it's going to go away. So we should learn how to live with it and take care of ourselves. There are a lot of people out there who still do not believe that this COVID-19 exists. And so when for example, I went to the market the other day with my mask on my face, and someone said to me, "Madam, COVID-19 is over. Why are you still wearing face mask?" You know, with those kind of statements and so many negative comments coming out, we all need to work hard to keep ourselves safe and our loved ones safe too.
Wow, I wish we could go on and on and on. Like that favorite rhyme song we used to sing, I hate to say goodbye. I cannot tell a lie. It's been wonderful having some of the best brains to think on a conversation that is ongoing. COVID-19. Of course, a pandemic that nobody prepared for, nobody saw coming, from the depth of and the width of Africa, Nairobi to Lagos, Cape Town to Abuja, Abidjan to Kampala, Addis Ababa to Antananarivo. It's been everywhere. And of course, 10 minutes ago, while this was ongoing, the World Health Organization said that the rate over 2 months has been dropping in Africa, but wants that governments across should not, of course, put their alls down. And of course, the key word is safety, safety, safety. To our audiences, yes, to our audiences, every part of the world, the video for this dialogue will be posted on Facebook in a couple of hours and on the IRJ website, www.irj.org. And watch out for announcements of the next dialogues and other activities that the IARJ would be embarking on. This is the 6th of a series, and a couple of more to go, and more activities from us. I would say, Merci, thank you, thank you, thank you. And like we say in this parts of Africa, Eshe gonna go day. So say, Imela, bye-bye, till we meet you again.
Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Bye.